questions and all your homework done. Yes? What's wrong? Can't hear. Can't hear. Jamie, can you turn me up a tiny bit? Is that better? I know this. I know this. I don't know how much more. Is that any better? Okay, good. Good, good, good. All right. Many of you who know me know I have a son, DJ. He's 24, and he came home for Christmas just a month or so ago, and he wanted to go see the new Avatar movie, Avatar Fire Nash. Fire Nash. And it had been almost 2 years since we saw the last Avatar. And granted, ladies, I mostly just ate popcorn, okay, just for the record. Um, anyway, the new Avatar movie was the previous one was The Way of Water. And all I really remembered was a bunch of blue people swimming around, okay? That's what my memory had. So he began to tell me a condensed story again so that I could watch this sequel and understand what he was talking about and not be totally lost. Well, I still was a bit lost, but it helped me kind of get my bearings. And as the movie got on, it started coming back to me, and I started understanding it. With any continued story, when you step away from it for a while, it's hard to remember where you were when you left off. And that's very true of 2 Samuel, because we've been away from it for a couple of months. If you remember back in 1 Samuel chapter 28, Saul was the king, and he'd gone to see the witch of Endor. You remember her? And he asked her to conjure up dead Samuel to give him some advice on how to deal with fighting the Philistines. Well, even to the witch's surprise, Samuel showed up and started speaking from the other side, and he told Saul, "Today, you'll be with me, you and your sons." I think it was tomorrow, he said, "You'll be with me." So the story that we're hearing here is only a few days have passed between chapter 28 of 1 Samuel and chapter 1 of 2 Samuel. David had been hiding out with Philistines, but they wouldn't let him go fight the Israelites. They didn't trust him to be loyal. So they sent him back to Ziklag. And when they got back to Ziklag, they realized that the Amalekites had stolen their wives and all of their property and all of their stuff. So David took off after the Amalekites, had an encounter with them, and brought back all of his family and friends and loved ones. Meanwhile, the Philistines had gone out to fight Israel. And in that process, 3 out of 4 of Saul's sons and Saul himself had been killed. This included Jonathan. We learned that Saul was badly wounded, and he wanted his armor bearer to kill him. And if you recall from that, he would not. And so out of the fear of being abused by the enemy, Saul took his own sword, and it said he fell on it, which means he would have done this kind of an action, I believe. The very next day, after he had died, the Philistines came, they took the bodies, and they impaled them on the city walls of Bethshan. But the good men of Jabesh Gilead came and took them off the wall and took them back home and buried them properly, okay? So all of these things that I just recounted to you happened within a few days of each other. And as we open 2 Samuel, we're right there within those days. It's as if there is no dividing line between these two chapters, or these two books. In verse 1, it says, "After the death of Saul, when David had returned from striking the Amalekites, David remained in Ziklag for 2 days." So he's been back 2 days now. He was likely very concerned about what had gone on with the Philistines and the Israelites. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have, television. They couldn't tell what was going on there. So he was likely very interested to know what had happened in this battle. On the third day, a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. And when he came to David, he fell to the ground and paid homage to him. Now, David's not a king. He's kind of a runaway at this point. People knew that he was supposed to be the king, but this man is falling down on the ground and paying homage to him. David said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." And David said to him, "How did it go? Tell me." And he answered, "The people fled from the battle, and many of the people who have fallen and are dead, and Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead." You know, I like repeated words. This word fallen that's in this particular scripture, we're going to see it several other times as we go through this morning. Then David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" And the young man said, "By chance, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear, and behold, the chariots and the horsemen were close upon him. And when he looked behind, he saw me, and he called me, and I answered, 'Here am I.' And when he said to me, 'Who are you?' I answered, 'I'm an Amalekite.'" Now, ladies, they didn't have video Bible, but I want one here. It starts out with the words, "by chance." I already don't trust what this Amalekite is saying. Other translations say, "he happened by." Well, how do you happen by the scene of a tragic war? I'm not real sure how that would happen. He hears if there were chariots and horsemen close upon him. Why wasn't he afraid that he would be caught up in some of that stuff? And my last proof of this is, do you think that a dying man who'd been leaned over on his sword would take the trouble of looking back to see who was behind him and then have a conversation about, well, who are you? And will you kill me? You know, all the things. I just think it's a little of a crazy story. And the fact that this man is an Amalekite, we should just immediately go, danger, danger, danger. An Amalekite is telling me this story. Because if you recall, the whole thing that caused Saul to lose his kingship from God was by not killing all the Amalekites. And now we have Amalekite in front of him. So in verse 9, he said to me, "Stand beside me and kill me, for anguish has seized me, and yet my life still lingers." So I stood beside him, and I killed him because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. Second use of Saul, fallen. And I took the crown on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. Okay, see? You may have noticed when we studied how the different Amalekites version in this story is different than the narrator. Completely different. In question 4, you started listing the differences between the Amalekite story and what the narrator had told us in 1 Samuel 31, right? There's some similarities on the surface there where it was in the same place. It was similar. They were defeated on Mount Gilboa. Many people fled. Many people were killed. And Saul had leaned on his sword or fallen, i.e. suicide. But the story was different because the Amalekite put himself into that story. He didn't mention Jonathan. He didn't mention the armor bearer, who, according to the narrator, waited until he saw that Saul was dead before he killed his own self, which is kind of a contradictory thing. He said that chariots were close upon him, and he indicated that Saul had looked behind when he's all stapled into this sword, and asked him called out to him and asked him who he was, and then asked him to kill him. So is it clear that I don't really trust this dude's story, right? Then David took hold and tore the hold of his clothes and tore them, as so did all the men that were with him. And they mourned and they wept and fasted until evening for Saul, and Jonathan, and his sons, and for the people of the Lord, because many of their brothers had fallen that day. Another use of the word fallen. Over the previous 7 years, Saul, out of jealousy, hatred, spite, and ungodliness, had taken away David's home, his security, the best years of his life, yet David mourned and wept and fasted at Saul's death. The fact that David grieves Saul and Jonathan teaches us a very important lesson about releasing our sadness, our bitterness, our unforgiveness, and to avoid trying to take revenge and to recognize that God is the ultimate judge and that he can manage vengeance. We don't need to do that for him. This is a choice we have to make, ladies. You're the only one that has a choice about letting go of those type of things in your life. And when it comes to harboring bitterness and unforgiveness, I can't help but remember this little song from a Disney movie, Frozen, that talks about, let it go, let it go, turn and slam the door. That's what we need to do on that type of bitterness and unforgiveness. In verse 13, David said to the young man who told him, where do you come from? And he answered, I'm a son of a sojourner, an Amalekite. Then David David said to him, how is it that you are not afraid to put your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of the young men and said, go execute him. He is struck down, and he was struck down so that he died. And David said to him, your blood is on your head. For your own mouth you have testified against you. I have killed the Lord's anointed. David had been chased and harassed by Saul for so many years. We read about it over and over again in 1 Samuel. Never once did he ever think it was the right thing to kill the king. He demonstrated that 6 times in 1 Samuel by saying it was unthinkable to kill God's anointed, over and over again. Now, we were asking question 5 of our homework, why we thought the Amalekite chose to lie to David about Saul's death. I hope you got an answer. It's kind of like mind reading in my mind to some degree. But I found 2 hints that I wanted to share with you. One from reading verse 2. When he came to David, he fell on the ground and he paid homage to him. He must have known, that David was going to be considered a replacement for King Saul. And he was trying to gain favor. He was trying to suck up to him, if you will. He wanted to be in his inner circle. Also in verse 10, we learn that he brought him Saul's crown in his armlet. So I believe his purpose here is also to win David's favor by bringing him royal symbols. Oh, you're going to be the king, right? You're going to be the next king. Boy, was he ever wrong. He didn't do his homework, because if he had, he would know that you don't kill the Lord's anointed, right? The fact that the Amalekite tries to claim credit for Saul's death should remind us of what led to Saul's downfall in the first place. If you look at question 7 in your homework, in that question, we went back and we looked at Leviticus 24. It indicated that a person should be put to death for killing another person. He told David that he'd killed Saul. He confessed to a murder. So he was guilty and should have been executed because he took another person's life. We also looked back at 1 Samuel 26 in a conversation between Abishai, who wanted to kill David in the cave. He wanted to kill David, but he wanted to kill Saul, I'm sorry. But David told him, no, because you could not raise your hand against the Lord's chosen and remain guiltless. David trusted God to take care of Saul in God's timing. One other question I asked myself, you know that question number 2 where they always ask you, what questions do you have about this text? Do y'all skip those? I'm sorry, you don't have to answer. I do sometimes, but this time I really had a question. Why is this story here? That was my question. What am I supposed to learn from this deception, from this Amalekite? What are we supposed to take away from it? And I think that highlights David's wisdom and his leadership. It also underscores his respect for Saul as God's chosen leader. David really believed that only God appoints and removes kings, even flawed ones. He relied on God's word for his decisions by using the Levitical law that we read. This is a really good lesson for us, ladies. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but we live in sort of a politically charged world these days. God is sovereign, and he allows all leaders to become leaders. And they have the power that they have because God gave it to them. And we live in a sinful world. That means that all of our leaders are going to be sinful. All of them, just like we are. So there's no one that escapes that. Only when Jesus returns will the world be restored under the protection of King Jesus, of the perfect King Jesus. Until then, we have to trust in the Lord and that he's working all things out for those who love him. If you want if you want one more rendition of this story of killing of Saul, it's in 1 Chronicles 10, but that version matches 1 Samuel 31. I think it's clear to say the Amalekite story was fabricated to gain favor with David. In verse 17, we hear that David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and Jonathan, his son. And it was said it should be taught to the people of Judah. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher, he said. Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exalt. You mountains, Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, or fields of offering. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely in life and in death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in luxurious scarlet or put ornaments of gold in your apparel. How the mighty have fallen. In the midst of the battle, Jonathan lies slain in your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing that of the love of women. How mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. We looked up that a lamentation was an expression of grief and sorrow, right? David was a poet and a musician, so it's reasonable that he would write a song in this particular occasion. Some people call it the Song of the Bow. We also learned that this song was written in the book of Jasher. Joshua 10 has a story in it that also mentions the book of Jasher. You remember when Joshua asked God to have the sun stand still while they finished a fight? Well, that little snippet is also in the book of Jasher. If you go searching on the internet, some will tell you that the book of Jasher is a lost book of the Bible. But I'm going to tell you, you can purchase the book of Jasher in translation form from Amazon. It's 400 pages long. I'm sure you would truly enjoy the reading. I specifically suggest that you try it at about 9:30. It'll work real well at putting you to sleep. But it contains Jewish oral tradition and history based on the stories of the Old Testament. It's an ancient book which happens to include 2 biblical references, as far from a lost book of the Bible that you might believe. Did you notice the repeated words, how the mighty have fallen? We've had it 3 times and talked about it in our homework. Question 11 asks us why David wanted Judah to learn the lamentation. Well, I think it was an important time. Their first king had just died, and he thought it was important to memorialize Saul in that time. Question 12 asks us, why did David not want the Philistines to learn his song? Because they would have rejoiced over it. It would have been on the radio, top 10, right? Playing over and over and over again like a, can't think of her name, some person who sings important songs. Question 13 asks us, why did David lament over Saul's death? David knew that Saul was God's anointed. As such, Saul was Israel's glory, their prominence, his splendor. He should be remembered. David wanted him to be remembered. The lament indicated that Saul and Jonathan both fought hard. They were beloved. They stood together. They were strong. But it also says that David was deeply grieved over the loss of Jonathan because they had been such good friends. And he saw Jonathan's care and loyalty toward him as strong as that of the covenant of marriage should be. You go looking on the internet for this, you're going to find all kinds of funky stuff. Okay, so don't do that. This level of commitment, trust, loyalty, and godly love between Jonathan and David was unsurpassed in David's life. If David had followed God's plan for marriage to one woman for a lifetime, he might have found a different type of fulfillment in his marriage covenant. But he didn't. Instead, he found loyalty with Jonathan. He found trust and friendship in Saul's son. It's truly very sad to me that that was the case, that he had to, at this point in his life, he could not find that kind of commitment and covenant with his wife. When we start into chapter 2, it says, after this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up to the cities of Judah? And the Lord said, go up. To which shall I go to? He said, Hebron, to Hebron. So David went up there with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal. We heard about these women in the last Bible study. David brought up the men that were with him and everyone in his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah. When they told David, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who had buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord because you showed loyalty to Saul, your Lord, and buried him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. Then we get this big, terrible 3-letter word, but. But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead, of the Asherites, and Jezreel, and Ephraim, and Benjamin, and all of Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And at the time that David was king over Hebron, over the house of Judah, was 7 years and 6 months. So we get some good news, and then we get some bad news. The very first thing David did was ask the Lord what he should do. We should not assume to know what our next best step is. If it had been me, I would have just mounted up my crew and we would have gone to the capital of Saul's city and I would have declared myself king. We're done. Peace out. Have a nice day. But he asked God for direction, which is something I should do more often than I do. I know I'm alone in that today. But even though David knows that he's going to be the king, he leaves it to the Lord to direct his steps. God's timing. God's timing. How often do we want to take the responsibility of timing in our lives? Ladies, we have to be proactive to ask God for direction in our lives rather than just rushing out on our own. I am so guilty of trying to cover the stuff that I have control over. I can do the easy stuff. I can make the easy decisions. I don't need to stop and ask the Lord about those. Really? No. I've learned in my 67 years that I need God for every decision that I make. Not because I'm unable to make those decisions, but because by asking, I'm putting my will under His will. It changes my question. It changes the way I react and relate to the Lord. By just running off and doing what we want to do in our timing, in our way, can I just get a witness? That usually gets us in trouble. I see a hand. An honest woman here. We see that David gathered his family and he goes to Hebron as he was directed. We're also reminded that he has 2 wives with him, Ahinoam and Abigail. We were asking our homework about whether this was okay. In question 18, we researched this in our homework. And from the very beginning, God's intent was for one man to marry one woman and to become one flesh with her. We also learn in this passage that David is finally the king. Woohoo! We waited a lot of chapters to get to this place. We learned that he paid great respect to Saul and the men of Jabesh Gilead. He sent them a message, blessing them for their loyalty and their steadfast love and their faithfulness. And he also added a little P.S. I've been anointed the king of Judah. Just in case you need to know that. I thought that was cute. Meanwhile, we hear, but Abner. Abner was the commander of Saul's army. He had installed Saul's youngest son, Ishbosheth, as king over the remainder of Israel. And we're told that he continued for 2 years. Now, there's 2 kings in Israel right now. This will change. David will become the king, but we will go back in further sections of the Bible to where there are 2 kings in Israel. Question 21 asks you a question. I hope you're smarter than me because I really got wrapped around the axle with this question about who is Abner? Who is Abner to Saul? But I'm not going to tell you my horrible tale of woe. Saul, if you recall, was the son of Kish. You remember that name from our previous study? Well, we learn that Abner is the son of Ner. So they have different fathers, so they're not brothers, right? But these two men, Kish and Ner, were sons of Abiel. So that makes Saul and Abner cousins, right? So in case you didn't find that, it was kind of difficult in English to get that all out. Verse 12, Abner, the son of Nun, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out to Mahanaim to Gibeah. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, the servants of David, went out and met them at the pool of Gibeah. And they sat down, and the one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, "Let's let the young men arise and compete before us." And Joab said, "Let them rise." And they arose, and they passed over by number, 12 from Benjamin or Ishbosheth's side, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And they caught each opponent by the head and thrust in the sword in the opponent's side, and so they all fell down together. Therefore, they called this place Helkoth Hazarim, which is a Gibeon. Yucky story. Ishbosheth's soldiers through Abner go to Gibeon. David's soldiers with Joab go to Gibeon. They come to this pool, probably a spring or a residue from an underground spring, and they park themselves on either side of it. Joab is David's commander. This is David's nephew. David has a half-sister named Zeruiah, and she had 3 sons. We're going to be introduced to them in verse 18, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. So they go sit on either side of this pool of Gibeon, 12 men from this side, 12 men from that side. I had a seminary professor say it was the first Super Bowl. It's like, no, that's 11 people, not 12. But anyway, it's about that stupid. Anyway, the battle resulted in renaming the field they were in to Helkoth Hazarim. Helkoth means field, so it's just not a place, a field. Hazarim, though, is interpreted as sharp blades. So they renamed this place the field of sharp blades or swords because of what happened there. So anytime they came back to that field, they remembered around that pool of Gibeon the first Super Bowl that happened where everybody died. It's unfortunate that this 12 by 12 match, it was indecisive. There was not a winner, just losers. And unfortunately, it caused even more engagement that we'll learn about in the future chapter. The battle was very fierce that day, according to verse 17, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. And the 3 sons of Zeruiah, who were Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel was swift on foot as a wild gazelle. So he can run fast. He should be in the Summer Olympics, right? Because he can run pretty fast. And Asahel pursued Abner as he went. He turned, we hear this, neither from the right nor from the left from following Abner. And Abner looked behind him and he said, "Is it you, Asahel?" And he answered, it is I, as he's running. Abner said to him, "Turn aside to your right or to your left and seize one of the young men and take the spoil." But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. Do y'all hear this word? You hear this word turn? You're going to hear it 5 times. And Abner said again to Asahel, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift up my face to your brother Joab?" But he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so that the spear came out of his back. And as he fell there and died where he was, and all who came to the place where Asahel had fallen, they stood still. We hear the word turn 5 times. Abner appears, from my reading, to be pleading with him to turn back, turn back, turn back, turn back. But he doesn't. I read one commentator that said they thought the reason he used the butt of the spear, that maybe he was just trying to push him down, push him out of the way. Don't know. We have to wait for the video Bible to come out for that. But it's unfortunate that this young man died. But Joab and Abishai, these are the brothers of the one who had just died, pursued Abner. And the sun was going down, and they came to the hill of Ammah, which lies before Giah, on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. And the people of Benjamin gathered together behind Abner and became one group, and they stood at the top of the hill. And Abner said to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers?" In the rest of the chapter, we learn that they did stop. They did turn around. They did go home. After 360 of Abner's soldiers had been killed, and 20 of David's soldiers had been killed. So 380 men had died, seemingly senselessly. Neither side asked the Lord if this little mini war was his will. They never stopped and asked. They just competed. The whole encounter was a lose-lose. Nobody won. But it doesn't conclude. It goes on into chapter 3. And it continues into our next study. But we know that David will ultimately be the king of Israel. Question 28. I want you to turn to 28 in your book. Did you answer this question? Come on. I know you don't want to answer that question. Question 28 was hard for me. I don't know if it was hard for you or not. It noted that neither David or Ishbosheth were actively involved, but they ask us what this suggested about their individual roles as leaders of 2 kingdoms. I want to know what y'all got for this question, because I really struggled with this. I really did. I don't know if any part of my answer is correct, but I'm going to share it with you because maybe you didn't get to a place where you felt comfortable about this question either. Because I'm still not sure I'm comfortable with it. But here's where I went to. From David's side. We know that David was the legitimate leader of Israel, right? He was anointed by God through Samuel. And I think that David was very confident in this, and he didn't have anything to prove. He knew he was going to be the king. He had that promise. He delegated to his commanders, as any leader should to some degree, but he stayed away from all the bloodshed that was happening. Nobody could put him in the middle of that war. It would be impossible because they just did it on their own. He's not seeking to seize Israel by force. He's allowing God to do things in his timing. All things which are things of a wise leader. Ishbosheth, on the other hand, does not command the events either. Abner does. Ishbosheth's kingdom exists because Abner made him a king. He's a figurehead, a replacement for Saul, and not a decisive leader. Ishbosheth has no God-ordained anointing, no divine appointment. The people didn't even crown him king. Abner did. So I think that's how we see these 2 men from a leadership perspective. Then I came to question 30. How can we face competition and conflict like these people did and maintain Christ-centered focus over self-centered desires? Whew, that's hard. If you work in the real world anywhere or ever did, you know how hard this is. It's hard just in everyday living, too. At first, I felt this was difficult, but then I went back and I looked at the answers that I'd written about David in question 28. and it helped me a little bit. David knew he was a legitimate leader. Ladies, we know that we are his children. We know that God is the legitimate leader of our lives, right? We're his daughters. He's our leader. Just like David delegated to his commanders, God has delegated decisions to us, and he expects us to act in a way becoming the office that he's given us as daughters of Christ. We should ask for his guidance always, always. Just as David wasn't seeking to seize control and was waiting on God's perfect timing, we have no reason to try to seize control of things and take control of our world, because this is not our home. This is not our home. We're only here for a brief little dusty moment. Our home is heavenly. And when competition and conflict comes, we can put our selfish desires down at the feet of Jesus, who's the author and the perfecter of our faith. That's the action that he calls us to. Ladies, I want you to pray with me now. Lord, I thank you for the time that we've had in your word today. So many things we can take into our own lives and learn from. We've been reminded that not everyone who shows up with precious gifts and sweet words that they want us to hear can be trusted, especially when they've sinned to obtain the gifts. Lord, give us discernment. The scriptures we've looked at this week have given us great biblical reminder of how to deal with grief. When someone we love is lost, Lord, please help us to pour out our sorrow with lamentation to you, knowing that you're in control of all situations. Lord, we've been reminded that your desire is for one man and to marry one woman for life. While life doesn't always work out this way, polygamy is not and never has been your will. We've been reminded that the battles of this world are not necessarily your will, and that many have started out of self-centered desires for control. Guide us with discernment to act in a godly manner when we encounter these situations. Lord, you've given us your mandate, our commission as your daughters. It's never about competition or conflict with others, but instead bringing the people we can to meet you. Now, thank you very much for these beautiful women who have gathered to study your word. Give them the dedication, the strength, and the encouragement to continue their great work in this study over the next weeks. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen. Thank you, ladies, for your attention. Y'all have a wonderful day. Pardon me?